has got a message. All right. We've been talking about this foundation stuff for a little while, and we need to know more about our foundation. So I'm going to kind of go into some how-to study stuff today. This is the best place I could think of to put it in this series. Yahweh, open our eyes that we might see wonders from your word. Okay, some things that we learned from last week before. Yahweh is truth. We discovered that. It says so in the book. We also found that Yahweh does not change. Never. These are good things, because what promises he made long ago are still in effect today. We talked about the foundation of our house of faith, and we said that the foundation, the very thing that holds it up, is the Torah. Now, if you look in Matthew chapter 7, towards the end of it, Yeshua discusses the house built on a rock or the house built on the sand. That rock is the Torah. All that is true, right, good, set apart, and pure in this world is measured against the yardstick that Yahweh gave us, the Torah. You want to know what sin is? It's in the book. Not what you think it is, or what your church tells you. It's right there in the book. I've discovered this. Most of you probably may agree with this. I think that to many Christians, the Bible is just a software license. You don't actually have to read it. You just scroll to the bottom and click, I agree. You know? Anybody ever do that? You ever read the software license for some of those programs? But that's not how we should be teaching our Bibles. We have to get some rules established. Now, I'm going to tell you, every one of my messages is based on these fundamental rules that I'm going to bring up. I took a hermeneutics course. It was long and there was lots of stuff, but it all boiled down and produced this. We have to establish rules to study, teach, or read Scripture. If you don't, you're going to have trouble. The rules have to be used for all Scripture study. New Testament, Old Testament, everything. And all commentary related to it better fit in these rules. Otherwise, just reject the commentary. The first part of this is context. You understand what context is? So many times people are accused of doing things because whatever it was he said is taken out of context of the whole paragraph. Here's the importance of context. It focuses us, the reader, on what the author is really talking about. Context should, actually, I prefer the word must, include the rest of the paragraph. Yes, we quote verses, but the verse exists in a paragraph. It exists in a chapter. Nobody writes things in disjointed verses. Did you ever write a letter? I mean, I know it's not done very much anymore. People do these little clicky things on their phone and zip. That's a letter. People don't write in verse format. They're not supposed to anyway. The importance of context is we cannot be drop smack in the middle of a book or a paragraph and just expect us to understand what's going on. Context allows us to understand the entire train of thought. Thus, we don't say some really stupid things, which I'm going to cover as we're moving along here. Moving right along. Now, this was a thing in the school. A text without context is only a pretext. Well, I'm not sure I fully understand what pretext means, but anyhow, we could ignore the context and we can make the text say anything we want. Let's get some examples. Christian Bible study. All we're going to look at is, you are not under the law, but under grace. All the rest that's associated with that phrase is gone. That's all we need to know. Right?
No.
Why? It just disjointed. It could mean anything we want. We can make it say anything we want. Observe, and this is would save us a lot of trouble, observe carefully the immediate context. What precedes and follows, the connections between them, to get a picture of what the author's trying to say. This guy, who we call Paul in the church, wrote a whole bunch of letters to different people or groups of people. Get this, contextually, he did not write those letters to you. So he wrote them to people he'd been teaching for a long time. They knew his writing style because that's the way he spoke, more than likely. So whatever he's saying in there has to be included with the whole of that major sentence, that paragraph. There's something else about context. The time and the culture. When was it written? And I'm not adding to whom was it written, but when was it written? We're trying to understand people long dead, many, many, many generations ago. Now, I'm not sure the exact date that Paul wrote so-and-so or so-and-so or so-and-so, but it was before 70 A.D., right? Somewhere in there. You weren't around then. We have absolutely no videotapes or anything else of his teachings. It is really difficult for us to read a one-sided conversation. So Margaret's on the phone talking to somebody, and I can't hear the other person. You know where this is going, right? Okay. And she's saying something. Wait a minute. I have no idea what the other person's saying. Oh, it happened this morning. Yeah. And we look foolish when we're doing that. But we do that with his letters all the time. We have no idea what, in answering your question, the answer is 42. Now, some of you who know me know what I'm talking about. But if you do not know me, you have no clue what I'm talking about. Culture. One of the things I heard in yeshiva was, we get this idea in our head that we want to go back to the first century Christianity or first century church or whatever it is we want to call it. We don't know what that was. We don't have any examples alive on this planet to find what that culture was like. How did those people think? Right now in the year, what is this, 2018, there are things that we can talk about. I'm going to show you some memes, M-E-M-E, or memes, or whatever they're called. You all know what I'm talking about. 20 years ago, if I had said, I'm going to show you a meme here, you'd want, what? Because they didn't exist 25 or 20 years ago. So we have no idea what that culture was. And some of the things that Yeshua said, and that the disciples said, and that Rav Shaul said, we're missing out on because we don't have the total cultural picture. And I don't want to go in there, because I'll tell you what, I don't want to go into too much of this, because it's pages and pages of notes. You know, I got a book that was out of this thing, put it all together, and it's, what's that, 2 inches, 2.5 inches of paper. Okay, context considerations. There's a rule. Rule number 1, and I adhere to this rule very firmly. Context, 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 context. I have memorized that rule. Actually, long before I started in this thing, somebody did a message or did a discussion on context, and I found out all my Bible reading had been taken out of context. So we're going to have to talk about that. So let's use it for instance. Here is an uplifting Bible verse. This would make a great meme. You can put a nice picture of flowers or something and post it on Facebook. All these I shall give you if you fall down and worship me. Isn't it just a wonderful, uplifting, biblical, and it is out of the Bible. And you can find it in Matthew 4:9 for those looking for it. Anybody looking for it? Who's the speaker? The adversary, the devil, Hasatan, Satan, whatever you're going to call this guy. That's the speaker. But boy, it sounds good. And out of context is exactly what I've done. In this rules, the first rule, the first context is the context of the paragraph the verse is in. There are very seldom do you find just a floating verse all by itself. Now here's a problem when you're a Torah studier. There, you're going along, you're reading a story, and then bingo, oh, wait a minute. Now they're talking about something else. And then he picks up the original topic so many verses later. That happens. It's actually a cultural thing. It's what they did. That's how they wrote. It's really annoying. But it's the way they did things. You have to stop and just accept it. Okay, that's the way they're going to write. Well, all right. And then you move along. You can take that part and just separate it out. Don't read it now. Go down, find where they're picking back up again, and read it. And then go back and read that other part. The second rule, or the second part of it, is the context, the chapter context. The chapter or chapters talk about something. Now, this is mostly New Testament. They wrote not in chapter format, but something similar to it, and then somebody had separated our Bibles out into these nice chapters. So if we're reading Corinthians and we happen to read some particular thing, and we got these 3 chapters talking about similar topic, stay there. That whole 3 chapters or 2 chapters is talking about a topic. Maybe you could write at the top of the chapter, topic, and what it's talking about. It really helps. And the third context is the book context. Rav Shaul wrote a letter to these people in Corinth. Then he wrote them another one. Now somebody said there was actually 3 letters to the Corinthians. Okay, I don't know. Who did he write? What did he write about? Why? It was a letter. They had a problem. They wrote him a letter. He responded. Look at the first couple verses, find out who it's addressed to. You might notice it's not addressed to you. Also, you go in the Old Testament and you see Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, that's prophecy. And stick to that. That's what's in there. Well, you go look in Kings and or Samuel and you start seeing stories about all these people and all these things that they do. There is prophetic material in there, but it's really a story about the kings. And it's good stuff. And you get a repeat over in the Chronicles. And the fourth context is the whole of Scripture. This is why I say the way the church has created this Torah man, their version of Paul, is against the context of the whole of Scripture. Because the way they're saying it, he teaches against the Torah. That's against the whole of Scripture. You cannot take something out of context of the whole of the Scripture. Here's a for instance. 73% of the Bible is the Old Testament. Now, I also heard 60%. I don't know. A whole lot of it is the Old Testament. And it's quoted in the New Testament. And to my knowledge, I've never found a New Testament quote in the New Testament. Even though some people talk about some of the other guys, they don't quote them. Okay, here's the challenge. You take Moby Dick, it's a good book, not the movie, it's a good book, and you rip out 73% of it. The first 73%. Why is Ahab mad with the whale, angry at the whale? You have no clue. Okay, there was the Japanese, some missionary guy went to Japan and he gave everybody these New Testament Bibles, the kind that Gideon's hand out, the little teeny New Testaments. I got one when I went in the Army. Still have it. Was very good. And later they went back and discovered that the Japanese weren't using those New Testaments, and they said, well, we don't know what this is talking about. Because they didn't give them the first part of the book. They had no idea. Okay, there's a second rule, and the second rule is, and this is what I follow, there are no contradictions in Scripture. It may appear that something contradicts something else. It is more than likely your knowledge or your understanding that's the real problem. Or it's a cultural issue that's the real problem. We don't know what the culture is. Or it's a translation problem, like we never have any problems with translations, you know what I mean? Yahweh's always the same. No matter what he teaches and in what period he reveals that teaching, we can be absolutely assured that he does not contradict himself. Otherwise, we got a problem with our salvation. And I don't think I want to worship such a God that can't keep his stuff together. Yahweh will not reveal something in a later period that would contradict something he has previously revealed. He can't do it. He can't void the Old Testament just because Jesus showed up, who was his son, his only begotten son, who was him, is him, and who taught what his Father told him to teach. Okay, there are two kinds of people. There are those people who know or who want the truth. They're going to allow the Scripture as it is written to speak to them. The others want validation. They already have decided what is, and they're going to look for, they're going to cherry pick little verses and subverses and pieces parts so that they can come up with some justification to what they already believe. There's another context consideration, and I didn't even understand this until we didn't even talk about it in our hermeneutics course. High and low context literature. The high context literature are those writings that the author writes for readers of that culture. The writings leave out most details because the author assumes the reader can supply the required context. You take a TV series and you go, well, we use Amazon. So I go to a TV series and plop in episode number 13 out of 200 episodes. And they're doing some stuff, and I'm watching it and wondering, what's going on? That TV shows high context. If you haven't watched episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way along, you're going to have a hard time with it. That's what the Bible is. Here's the other issue. The author wrote to people in their day, in their language of that time, using idioms and terminology of those people. Okay, somebody wrote this book to people in their very own day. People that lived up the road. People they run into all the time. They used idioms. You know, an example is we use the word cool a lot to say, boy, that's really cool, man. You know, and they're going to look at that saying, what's the temperature of it got to do with anything? Shalom.